Did you know the Ancestral Kitchen podcast has a thriving online community? Patreon members love our private group discussion forum, away from the noise of mainstream social media. In this group, conversations brim with ideas, recipes, humor, and thoughtful discussion of member questions. There's a bonus exclusive podcast where Allison and I answer member questions and talk more informally about our kitchens and our lives. This private podcast also includes after-show tidbits with guests, everything we didn't dare say on the main feed, and all the extra stuff we couldn't fit into the primary episodes. There's a monthly live chat where we get together with members, and afterwards the recording goes up in the private podcast feed for members to listen in later. Come and be a part of a group that will befriend, encourage, and support you and your kitchen endeavors. We'd love to have you join us. Find all the details at ancestralkitchenpodcast.com.
Beans, the magical fruit. The more you eat, the more you absorb valuable minerals and proteins, improve your cardiovascular function and the health of your arterial walls, as well as cholesterol and fat absorption, boost your digestion and gut bacteria health, and enjoy an array of bright and colorful foods. But what about that other turbulent side benefit? In this explosive episode, we will break down, like an enzyme breaks down an oligosaccharide, the compounds in beans and the processes in your body that can cause the possible noxious side benefits, as well as what ancestral peoples did to deal with this, aside from cracking ancient jokes that never get old. We will discuss in detail a patented process purported to eliminate all of the potentially thunderous side effects using only water, time, and heat. And we will additionally talk about herbs that can be cooked or served alongside beans to quell the collapse of cheeky applause. There is a copious amount of additional material that I could only include in the show notes for reasons of being too inappropriate to read on air, and they can be found on our website, ancestralkitchenpodcast.com, by clicking the episodes drop-down. I tested the absolute technology limits with the length of show notes today, and I ran out of room on our podcast apps. So go and enjoy the mountains of links and additional text I've put there for you to enjoy. In this episode, I hope you will find the critical information you need to understand the possible pitfalls of beans and where those pitfalls come from, and leave feeling confident in how to deal with them and enjoy not only beans, but all their benefits and none of their possible sound effects. Researching this episode left me all the more in awe of the incredible ancient value beans bring to our diet, and more determined than ever to include them in a variety of meals across the week, without what the bard called any strange eruptions.
Welcome to the Ancestral Kitchen podcast.
I'm Alison, a European town dweller living in England.
And I'm Andrea, living on a family farm in Northwest Washington State, USA.
Pull up a chair at the table and join us as we talk about eating, cooking, and living with ancestral food wisdom in a modern world kitchen.
Hello, Andrea.
Hello, Allison. How are you? How are you feeling today? Welcome back. All the things.
Thank you. Yeah, my voice, as you may be able to hear, is still a little bit dodgy, but I'm hoping I'm so looking forward to this episode, and I know how much you've got to say because I've seen the notes. So listeners won't know that I just got back from a week at supporter, a long-time supporter and listener, Nicole's house in Italy, which was absolutely wonderful. And she was very excited that we were going to do a beans episode on Tuesday. She said, "Oh, I'm so excited. It's been so long. Everyone wants a beans episode." So I'm okay. Yeah. How are you?
I am well. And I'm hoping that the beans deliver what
Thank
people
you.
are asking for.
I think they will.
There's a lot of research in here. If anybody listening has already checked the show notes, it's a very long bibliography of links that they're going to have to go through. So I put most all my resources in the show notes, so that there's a lot of them.
You know, when the podcasts go across to YouTube, because we have them, at the moment we have the audio automatically going to YouTube. YouTube's only got a certain number of characters in its like show notes section, and every month it says, your podcast is too long. We've got to cut these things out of the show notes. I'm like, oh, whatever. Whatever.
Hey, we are the podcast with epic show notes, Allison. I do not like when I listen to podcasts and they say, we'll put it in the show notes. And then you look in the show notes and there's nothing.
Yeah.
And so I do what I wish they would do. And I put everything in the show notes. So it's a lot.
So it's early in the morning for you. Have you had some breakfast?
I did actually. I had a splendid breakfast. As of the recording of this episode, we're fairly close to St. Patrick's Day. And my sister and I had a splendid St. Patrick's Day feast that we prepared for our families. And we corned 3 briskets of ours. And I will put the recipe in the show notes.
Wow, thank you.
It was delicious. And so I actually had leftover corned beef. I had boiled cabbage, potatoes, parsnips, and carrots for breakfast. And then I made myself a Earl Grey latte. So Earl Grey, honey, and some milk. And let me tell you, if I'm a little extra lively today, it's because I had some food. It was good.
Wow.
Did you eat?
Yeah, so I did eat a kind of easy food today. My usual, let's cook up 2 chicken carcasses, because I buy chicken carcasses in a pack of 2. Put them in to make meat stock this morning for an hour and a half, and then pick the chicken off. And half of it fed us for lunch, just straight chicken on the plate. And the other half is in the fridge for tomorrow to make risotto. But today we ate the straight meat, which was delicious, with some steamed kale, and always had a bread that was 75% spelt, 25% rye, and I had my gluten-free that I'm making with some lard and some salt. Simple and lovely.
That's perfect.
I'm hoping later in the year to do a 7 things to do with a chicken carcass episode, in which I will talk more at length about the routine
you are
I have.
contracted into that now, because ever since you mentioned it on an episode a while ago, people have said to me, I can't wait for that 7 things to do with the chicken carcass episode.
So that's got to come.
So no wiggling out.
No, exactly. So tell us a bit about why we're doing this episode on beans, because I know that there's been some chat on Discord about it, hasn't there?
That is why the Discord made me do it. The conversation around beans comes up fairly frequently. Either people don't like them, or people don't know how to cook them, or people want to know, is there an ancestral way to prepare them? Are we doing something wrong? So many times when you eat beans from the store, you're like, I don't know about this situation. And so it feels like something is off. And people are very right in their estimation. So I'm hoping we can answer all those questions and put all the concerns to rest with this episode.
Great. Okay, so before we start, and I know I can feel I'm holding you back from getting to all the good stuff. Let me just do 2 things. The first one is read a wonderful review we've had from DebSue52 on Apple.
Oh, I always have time to hear that.
Which is 5-star. Do please go and leave us a 5-star review. There are details in the show notes how to do it if you're on Apple. And this review is titled Lovely and Actionable. And DebSue says, I began listening to this podcast 1 year ago. And in that time, I've made 100% rye sourdough bread, sauerkraut, tibikos, liver, beef and lamb heart, and so much more, all for the first time. I love how practical you both are with clear steps we can take towards a more ancestral kitchen and lifestyle. It feels so much like I have you here with me in my kitchen, cheering me on. Thank you for all of the love and care you have put into this podcast. Thank you, DebSue.
Wow.
That's a lovely thing to say.
Were wide. That is a long list of things, and all for the first time, and in a year.
That's incredible, isn't it?
Gracious. Wasting no time. Well, we are with you in your kitchen today.
doing something else for the first time. Yeah, exactly. There's one more thing that I want to tick off before we get started. It's about the newsletter. So we have, from our base over here, we have 2 newsletters going out semi-regularly. The first one is from me at Ancestral Kitchen, and that generally goes out once every 2 weeks. And then there's another newsletter from the podcast, which Andrea at the moment is in charge of. And that has been going out about once a month, usually at the end of the month. Now, I've had some people tell me that they've signed up for either or both of the newsletters, but they're not getting them. So based on the frequency that I just told you, if you think you haven't heard from us, and you should have, do check your spam. Also, if you're on Gmail, they have a promotions tab. Check that. There's only there's a whole thing hidden behind a curtain as to why things get put in spam and why things get put in promotions tab, and there is really only so much we can do. We can try our best to make sure they get to your inboxes, but often they don't, and that's out of our hands. So if you notice that you haven't got them, do have a look in the places where they might be hiding, move them back into your inbox. Most email providers have a safe sender section. You could put our email addresses in there. The other way to potentially get those emails into your inbox, not your spam, is to hit reply and just type something in there like, I'm doing this to try and get these into my inbox, and we'll know that it's not an emergency and we don't need to do anything. And that might mean that in the future they come to your inbox. But do know we are sending emails out and telling you about all the wonderful things that are going on. So if you haven't got them, do have a nose around and see if you can find them somewhere else.
Yes, please save us from the spam and promotions folder. You want to be main inbox friends.
Indeed. Okay, that's my admin over, Andrea.
Okay. Well, then onwards and upwards. We don't have, I guess I could put my notes in as a download. I've thought about doing that. It's 13 pages, so maybe.
Oh.
But we don't really have any official downloads for this episode, but do check the show notes on the website, because speaking of things that don't fit in the app's information box, I had some pictures and extra chunks of text that I couldn't put in the actual show notes in the podcast player. So I took advantage of our website, and they're in the show notes on the website. So if ever we say something is in the show notes, by the way, and you think you can't find it, make sure if we said it's on the website, some stuff doesn't work in the podcast players. But check our website, ancestralkitchenpodcast.com. We have all of our show notes there, and usually a little more than what you can see on the app. So,
yeah.
All right. So this is kind of how today's going to look, Allison. We'll talk about beans and ancestral food. And as I said, there's some things going to be in the show notes. Some of them I'm not putting on air because they're actually inappropriate. So you're going to have to check the show notes to see them. And then I want to talk about beans for health. Are they just for protein, or what are they doing for us? And then I want to talk about how to properly prepare beans. And I'm going to share with you guys a patented process, which is easily done at home, where the patenters claim that all of the gas-producing compounds are removed from the beans by preparation in this method, which has its roots in ancestral practices. So we'll see. We shall see. So let's hear first from today's sponsor, and then I'll get started with the known history of beans.
Hey, you washing the dishes. Been there. You've heard Allison and I talk over and over about her love of rye sourdough bread. Well, I might actually call it an obsession, but that's neither here nor there. Now you can make Allison's rye sourdough in your own kitchen with her as your teacher. And she's a really good teacher. Rye is economical, it's delicious, and full of nutrients and low in gluten. There's a reason why it has been a darling of bread bakers for centuries. Make it into sourdough, as Allison will show you in her course, Rye Sourdough Bread, Mastering the Basics. And you've got an amazing, tasty, and nutritious staple in your kitchen. It's traditional and it's nutritional. In this course, you'll learn everything there is to know about how she creates and maintains her rye sourdough starter, all about whole grain sourdough rye, including the key differences between baking with rye and wheat, how to make 2 loaves, an everyday rye sandwich bread, and a delicious Russian-style dark rye loaf, and what to do with your sourdough discard, including video walkthroughs for sourdough pancakes and a tasty, sweet, spiced cake. Head to www.ancestralkitchen.com/rye.
How far back do we have documentation of people eating legumes generally? So I'll say beans today, but we're kind of capturing beans, lentils, and peas underneath that entire umbrella. And what did ancestral peoples do with beans? Well, there's interesting results when you look up how long ago did people eat beans. And I ended up going down long rabbit trails, including long YouTube videos and scholarly articles and archaeology reports, which is quite fun, actually. I enjoyed myself doing that. So here's some of the things, and some of what I'm going to say might somewhat conflict with the other. Everybody wants to claim they're the first and the oldest and greatest of everything. So we do have evidence of people eating beans in Thailand at least 9,000 years ago.
Okay.
And then some historians say beans were first domesticated in Mesoamerica about 7,000 years ago, making them one of the earliest cultivated crops we know of. Interestingly, one thing you run into with everything from invention to literacy and writing and different technologies like that, when you start looking at history, you find it seems like in multiple continents at the same time, things were kind of being invented or discovered or used. And so sometimes you might say, well, this place was doing it first, but this place was also doing it about then. And it's, maybe they all independently discovered or invented something.
Well, it's interesting to me that you say Mesoamerica because obviously, when we think about the first domestication, my mind goes to grains.
Yeah.
And I think about the Middle East, the Fertile Crescent. So I was expecting you to say the Fertile Crescent was the first place. But no, really across the waters in Mesoamerica. It's really interesting. I wonder whether it was similar in the Fertile Crescent around the same time or not. Like you said, perhaps it was.
Well, I do have something interesting that it doesn't disagree with what you're saying. So let me read a few more interesting tidbits. And again, some of the links that I used are in the show notes for this. So if you want to watch a cool video, you too can watch it. Wild fava beans were gathered in Afghanistan and the Himalayan foothills in ancient days. And there's a quote that says, the first cultivated beans appeared 4,000 years ago in the Aegean, Iberia, and Transalpine Europe, and they were large-seeded broad beans. Now, you notice that this now directly disagrees with what I just said about Mesoamerica.
Yeah.
Experts disagree. Theories and theses are different, but we're seeing a trend. They've been around for a minute. If you listened to our ancestral pantry episode, you heard us refer to Egyptian lentils, and then like what Allison, you were saying, Sumerian lentils.
Mm-hmm.
And in Anatolia, in southern Turkey, there's a UNESCO site called Çatalhöyük. Yes, I have watched a bunch of videos to figure out how to say that. Sometimes referred to as the oldest village in the world.
Wow.
This is a place we could spend a lot of time learning. They have found some very fascinating things there, Allison, related to food. But they've unearthed 18 levels of Neolithic occupation from between about 7,400 BC to 6,200 BC. And they have bread, which was baked, they believe, around 6,600 BC, which, remember, you have to add that plus the Anno Domini years, so 8,600 years.
Yeah.
So there's traces of emmer and lentils in that bread. And it was also baked at a lower heat, about 140 C or 284 F. So I'm imagining it was probably a very dense, harder bread.
Yeah.
Kind of sounds satisfying and rich. And then peas reigned supreme in Britain. And The famous
course,
potato
yeah.
wasn't introduced to our Anglo friends until about the late 1500s, and it did come from Mesoamerica. And it was not well received at first. Well, it came first to Ireland, and then it didn't come across the water very well, largely due, most likely, to xenophobia, because people didn't want things associated with people they had a beef with. So
Yeah.
the trend we see is it's been around for a bit, and we have archaeological remains of beans, fava beans, lentils in things way, way back. Did ancestral people
Indeed.
have any issues digesting beans? This is where you need to please go to the website show notes, because I want to tell you this, but I'm not going to say it on air. So there's the oldest known ancestral joke may have to do with the consumption of beans. So please see the show notes to see.
We have to do that. We have to do an episode about old ancestral jokes now, don't we?
Yes. This joke was inscribed on a clay tablet by the Sumerians, and they actually had a couple of jokes written down. So what I would say is, when you read this old joke, you will realize that the modern sense of humor has not evolved at all. We haven't changed. Ancient Norse.
You think about clay tablets, and you think they have such gravity to them, and
yes,
it's a clay tablet. I've just finished reading a fiction book, which I think is called "There Are Rivers in the Sky," which was all about kind of southern Turkey and down further into the Fertile Crescent, and about a guy who worked in Victorian London and came up from the slums to work for the British Museum and was decoding tablets from the region, clay tablets. And it's an absolutely fascinating book, learned so much. But I think of all of the things that he was reading on these clay tablets, and one of them was the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Oh, gosh.
All these amazing things, but also there were bean jokes on there as well.
So, yeah, it made me laugh, because, we love to pass around our, funny memes and jokes that we send to each other. And that ain't new, folks. That is not new. The ancient Norse people also appear to have enjoyed beans and lentils. I came at this one backwards because I read something in the Lokasenna, which is a poem or Loki's song in the Poetic Edda. And I thought, wait a minute, did they eat beans? So that was reverse engineered information. And yes, indeed, they did appear to bake beans and lentils into their breads. And I have put that joke in the show notes on the website as well.
So we have to go and see them.
I
think
know.
that beans and lentils in breads was a very strong thing in the UK too, probably later than this. But when there wasn't enough flour around, or just to stretch the flour full stop, then peas were put in bread. It was just something that was normal, and we've kind of stepped away from that now with our wheat and our abundance of things. We don't really feel the need to put those lentils or those peas in bread, but it was a very common thing to do back a few thousand years ago, I think.
Just the other day. It does seem quite common. And in fact, there was a conversation in Discord where one of our supporters said, I do not like beans. It's a sensory issue with me, and I really want to have them in my diet. And some amazing suggestions came up, including ways to, I think I put the recipes in the show notes actually, but ways to incorporate beans into things, such as baking them into breads and brownies and things like that. So, if you really want beans, you can prepare them according to the method we'll discuss today. And then you could blend them or grind them into breads and whatnot. So then there's this interesting little piece of history called bile beans. And this journey for me started with our supporter, Rebecca, who shared, actually in Ireland, and she shared a story in Discord. She was talking about a person named Karen Hurd, who was interviewed in a podcast episode. Check the show notes. I'll put the link in there. And after listening to her, Rebecca actually was so inspired with the importance of beans that she started cooking with them more, including, as I said, putting them into brownies. So here's a story that Rebecca shared, which I'll kind of share in breve. She said Karen had a young child or baby who became mysteriously ill. Nobody could help her, and it seemed the baby was going to die. So she used to work in the military in chemical warfare, and she recognized that the baby had been poisoned. Now, I am paraphrasing Rebecca's paraphrase, so if I got some of these details off, just listen to the episode. The story of Karen starts at right about 8 minutes into the episode if we want to hear it completely. So she, knowing the baby had been poisoned, she then learned that people had been treated in their house for insects, or treating the house for insects, and they'd used 100 times the amount of insecticide you're supposed to, and the baby had been crawling on that treated carpet. So she went digging in libraries to learn about a cure, and she learned about how our bodies naturally recycle our bile. This is very bad for the baby because the bile was full of the chemicals it needed to get rid of, and the chemicals were just circulating around and around. So introduced beans. They have a special type of fiber that binds to bile and carries it out of your body. This would happen, Rebecca was thinking, that was at the end of the small intestine, which would line up with what we're going to share with you today. For the full effect, don't eat much fat with the beans, otherwise the bean fiber will bind to the fat instead. But by this, I also infer if you want to eat a lot of fat, but you don't need all of the energy from the fat, eat it with your beans. So she would literally blend beans and squirt it into the baby's mouth, and the baby fully recovered. So Rebecca says, I like to imagine my bile being refreshed when I eat beans. Well, I love that. And this is so funny, Alice. And you know that phenomenon when you learn a word and suddenly you see it everywhere?
Everywhere, yeah.
Yep. Well, just a few days after Rebecca shared this astonishing story, don't ask why, but for some reason I was looking up your King Edward VIII, and I wanted to see.
They're just obsessed with the English monarchy, that's why.
Yeah, I guess so. We're like,
that's my diagnosis.
Can we read about yours, please? So King Edward VIII is the king who abdicated the throne, and then because of that, his brother became the King of England, and then successively, very shortly after, you had Queen Elizabeth, who had the longest reign in history. So there was a front page newspaper spread called Duke of Windsor Weds. This was when he had already abdicated and he wedded Wallis Simpson. I was less interested in the pictures of the 42-pound Wallis Simpson and the 46-pound Duke of Windsor than I was by the picture at the bottom of the newspaper, which is an advertisement for bile beans. I was like, wait a minute.
Oh my gosh.
Where have I heard this before?
Wow.
I actually put the pictures of this newspaper in the show notes on the website. I can't put pictures in the podcast player, but I can put them on the website. So the ad starts out with the captivating title, How Will You Look in a Swimsuit? So I went looking, and I found in the show notes, again, I put this link, the London Museum website has an old advertisement for bile beans. Keep you healthy, slim, and attractive. The medically tested laxative.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
I know, I was selling everybody on this. So I don't know if that doesn't inspire you to eat beans, like what will? So then that was crazy enough. And then I wanted to read you some excerpts from the Weston A. Price's description of legumes.
Okay.
And I'm going to give mad credit to Catherine Chapp, I think is how you might pronounce her last name. She wrote this article, which I'm going to reference again at the end of the episode with the incredible information about beans. And she did a very good job on this episode, or this article. She said the high protein content of legume seeds makes them a potential source of high quality nourishment with impressive stores of minerals, including magnesium, potassium, phosphorus, iron, molybdenum, as well as B vitamins such as folate and thiamine. All legumes contain both omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. Kidney and pinto beans are particularly high in omega-3. There seems to be fairly high content of both soluble and insoluble fiber in legumes. And then she said there's also the contribution of legumes to our cardiovascular health is not just from the benefit of those binders, but also the potassium and magnesium minerals, which we need. Now, Allison, you and I are also going to talk about phytates in this episode. So Keep in mind that I said that beans bring us a lot of minerals. The potassium and the magnesium is not only vital for normal functioning of your cardiovascular system, it also helps to regulate your blood pressure, as well as electrical impulses, remember, electrolytes, of nerves and muscles, including the heart contraction. So, with all of those amazing nutrients, there is also the benefit that the B vitamins convert homocysteine in the bloodstream into innocuous forms. And homocysteine is a natural byproduct of protein metabolism, but it can damage arterial walls and is a marker of heart disease with much more predictive value than serum cholesterol levels. So you're getting minerals, you're getting protein, you're getting the components that need to come in with protein to make sure there's no damaging byproducts of protein. You're cleaning your bile. You're going to be healthy, slim, and attractive. But what about the other side effect of beans? So let's take an ad break, Allison, and we'll come back to talk about the hazards of beans.
Do you love oats? Want to try your hand at a traditional Scottish oat fermentation? Suans is just that. It was made in Scotland for centuries and will give you both a creamy, easy to digest porridge and a tangy probiotic drink. My video course, Suans, the Scottish Oat Ferment, over at the Fermentation School, will guide you through everything you need to know to create these two ancestral foods in your own kitchen, no matter what equipment you have. Head to ancestralkitchen.com/Suans, ancestralkitchen.com/Suans, SOWANS, or click the link in the show notes to get a 10% discount automatically applied.
Digesting legumes. I'm calling this section a layman's understanding of the process. So, if you're listening and you're a microbiologist or a gastroenterologist, please write in if I got this wrong. I read so many papers on this, and I think I put together a narration that combines. I had to be able to understand it, and I explained it to multiple people in order to make sure I could say this well. So here we go.
Thank you for doing that. Thank you for doing this, because reading those papers, I know after like 2 or 3 of them, your eyes start to glaze over and you're like, what was that? I've read that for this and that and all the different long names. And I know how hard it is to sort through that information and make it clearly accessible. So before you even started,
I could really benefit if somebody like Hannah wanted to teach us a class on reading papers. That would be awesome.
I think I need a different brain because I glaze over after a little while. I'm like, am I still here? Hello, what's happening?
Exactly. Well, I made it through by trying to narrate it. Actually, narration was the most helpful tool because I found if I could explain it to you, then I immediately saw where I couldn't fill in the gaps. So here we go.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. The difficult to digest part of beans, which leads to the possibly unfortunate side effect, as alluded to by the Sumerians and the ancient Norse, is oligosaccharides of the raffinose and stachyose families. I will from now on just refer to oligosaccharides, not the families. Oligosaccharides, as the name kind of implies, are a type of carbohydrate. They move undigested through your stomach and then through your small intestine because we do not have the enzyme alpha-galactosidase in our stomach or small intestine.
And that breaks it down.
Correct.
Okay.
I don't know if some people do or if they used to or if it just never exists there. This is something I couldn't figure out from all the literature that I went through. Nobody ever particularly
you would think if those old tablets had the jokes about the beans and the side effects of the beans, that particularly in those civilizations, which were, the cradle of humanity, a lot of them, that they didn't have it by the sound of it.
Possibly. Well, as we're going to come to, that's not all a bad thing. Once the oligosaccharides pass unscathed into the large intestine, they are then fermented by bacteria that have the enzyme alpha-galactosidase. And here's a direct quote. Once in the large intestine, raffinose encounters resident gut microbes. I like to picture him facing them. Man. Certain bacteria in the colon, your large intestine, possess the alpha-galactosidase enzyme and ferment the sugar for their own energy. This process produces gaseous byproducts, including hydrogen and carbon dioxide. So the same way, Allison, if you were fermenting, say you put some ginger and a saccharide of some sort, some sugar or sucanut or molasses into a closed container, then it produces carbon dioxide as they begin to digest those carbohydrates. And then everybody knows, we've had some people blow up bottles and you open it and it froths out. If you don't burp it, which I have to admit sounds better than farting your bottles, the fermentation process produces that proliferation of beneficial bacteria in the beverage that are good for us. So the fermentation process is a good thing. The waste product actually is a marketable thing because people say, I want my drink to be fizzy, and that's the carbon dioxide, which is the waste product of the carbohydrates being consumed by the enzymes in the bacteria. However, in a bottle, that's pretty easy to do. You just pop the lid. But if you're in a public place and you're the bottle, it's a little more awkward as the scenario is recognized.
It's really interesting to actually potentially draw a line between the process being bad and the potential gas being bad, because if you go to some ferments, like if you ferment buckwheat into a bread and it's solely buckwheat, the gases that come off the buckwheat are really not pleasant at all. But the process of the buckwheat fermenting and the end result of the bread or the porridge or whatever you make is really tasty and really good. And the work that's been done in that starch is wonderful. But the gases aren't wonderful. And I think it's easy for us to think, oh, well, if it smells bad, it must be a bad thing. But actually, those two things you're saying, I think, have a distinction in them. It doesn't mean necessarily that what's happening is a bad thing if the gas smells bad to us, and I'm using quotes,
Right. And fermenting foods in your large intestine, if you think about it, it is producing more beneficial enzymes and bacteria by the process of fermentation, just like you do when you make sauerkraut. And those gut-friendly bacteria make the alpha-galactosidase enzyme. So this is not a conclusion that was offered because the papers I was reading weren't necessarily about health or anything. They were just more about processes. But my thought was, well, probably having beans on a somewhat regular schedule would be one of the most beneficial things you could do. Not only would you begin to you would have more of the things you needed to deal with beans, but you would also be continually getting the benefits of the bile being cleansed, the homocysteine being dealt with, and all of those other benefits. And I apologize to anybody who is listening, and if I am painfully pronouncing names wrong, I'm doing my best, but I'm not a Latin speaker, so.
Yeah, and we're not scientists. It was interesting when we talked to Nicole about this last week when I was there, that she said, is there a link between the potential offensive smelliness of gas or it's a bad thing or it's a good thing? Does it mean? And I wonder if it just means there are different strains of bacteria that are doing the fermentation, or the beans are slightly different to one time to another time, and therefore that's producing different side effects. I can imagine, listening to what you've said, that could be the case, that just a small change in the bacteria or a small change in the product the bacteria being fed could make a big difference to the to the off gas that's coming. Did you come
Yes.
across any of that in your research or not?
No, I didn't find anything particular, but I thought it would be interesting to see a PubMed article called something along the lines of a comparison of the aromas of different gaseous outputs from humans based on diverse inputs. But no such article was to be found by me at any rate.
shame.
But if you know of one,
Yeah,
inbox
do
me.
send it our way. Yeah.
So here's another direct quote. Studies show that raffinose consumption, remember that's the oligosaccharide family that is primarily responsible for this issue. Raffinose consumption promotes the growth of health-associated bacteria, particularly bifidobacteria and lactobacilli. As these microbes ferment raffinose, they produce valuable compounds known as short-chain fatty acids. These short-chain fatty acids are used as an energy source by the cells lining the colon and contribute to a healthy gut environment. So important. The farther down this path I went, the more convicted I felt that beans, I always just thought of them as kind of an alternate protein source. And I'm beginning to see that they play a much more important role in our body. And I can see why every culture that I can find, Thailand, Mesoamerica, the ancient Norse, Sumerians, they all seemed to be prioritizing legumes in their diet somewhere. So, which bacteria make alpha galactosidase and contribute to breaking down the raffinose? I wanted to know this particularly, and I found the answer. Bacteroides thetateomicron and Bacillus subtilis.
Yeah, I've heard of that one.
And just as a personal note of interest, I looked these up on, Gary and I did gut tests recently, and we got spreadsheets back with thousands of gut bacteria on them. And I looked them up to see if they were on the chart, and they were in extremely low proportions. So I thought, okay, I'm going to be needing more of these beans in my diet. And then resistant starches. This is where the short chain fatty acids are important. Resistant starches are fermented to produce short chain fatty acids like, can't say if I'm pronouncing this right, but butyrate. And butyrate we have found in other things quite important, because if you ever look up high blood sugar or how to manage blood sugar naturally, you're going to come up with lots of conversations about producing short chain fatty acids like butyrate, because these are necessary for maintaining stable glucose levels. A person with very low butyrate levels might find they have high fasting blood sugar. Also seems to come up as extremely important for weight loss, perhaps hence the swimsuit illusion by our prior advertisers. So now that we kind of understand what it is exactly process-wise that is causing the lower intestinal disturbances, let's introduce a few methods of improving the process so that you don't have quite so much bubbly. All right, bit of herbs.
I have to just say, first of all, that
Yes.
that Gabriel would be very amused by all the different names you're coming up for the lower intestinal disturbances. I think I might introduce that one to him over dinner tonight because, he's a boy and he's 11 and he would be like, wow, Andrea's got all these names. Wow, cool. Okay,
well, you tell
carry
him,
on. Sorry,
you tell him, everybody thinks it's funny to grab the same one clever word that they've heard and use it over and over. But if you want to be 10 times funnier, just come up with a different way to say it every time.
Yeah.
It's way more interesting. So we are turning...
bitter herbs.
I should have alluded to also, Alison, I'm pretty sure Shakespeare makes some references as well.
I think in Twelfth Night, what's that one? There's two like jokey ones. One bloke's really
that
big.
real quick.
And
exactly
there's a short one who goes around with him, Andrew Ague Cheek or something. I'm sure that there's some references in there to that.
There has to be some kind of Falstaff joke or something. Okay, so not in Twelfth Night, but generally speaking. So now I want to turn to the interior of Mexico, which now we know perhaps our Mesoamerican neighbors were the farther down than Mexico, but were the harbingers of legumes for the world. So maybe this is not surprising that we come to Mexican traditional foods. In Mexican traditional foods, beans are eaten daily. And I talked to Brittany, who is a listener and supporter, about this because she lives fairly close to Mexico, and she has spoken before of the herb epazote, which I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. She said the regions where it grows native are fairly small. It is technically a perennial plant, but if you're out of the region, you can grow it as an annual. It can be purchased dried in Latin groceries. I could not find it online anywhere.
Oh, gosh.
It is also considered medicinal. Mountain Rose Herbs sells the seeds for it, and in English, epazote translates to stinky sweat or skunk sweat.
Oh. Okay.
And apparently, if you buy it fresh, you understand how it earned the name. It has a strong and pungent aroma, but when you dry it or you cook it, the odor mellows out, leaving behind a pleasantly complex taste. Brittany has said before she loves putting epazote in beans anytime she cooks them. But epazote is more than just a complex, pleasant taste. It is one of a number of herbs known as carminatives.
Okay.
I hope I got that right. These are gas and bloating reducing herbs. So there's kind of a family of carminatives. That isn't the proper Linnaeus term. It's not a classified family, but I'm just using it in that way. The way it works is not well researched, to which I say, why? Why don't we understand this? The information out there on this is surprisingly lean, but it is believed to reduce the amount of gas-producing bacteria as well as reduce the amount of oligosaccharides that are fermented. And if I understand what I read rightly, it is breaking down the oligosaccharides before they get to the large intestine, where gas is usually produced. I think what I read said that they believe it to reduce the amount of gas-producing bacteria. I actually doubt that aspect. My thought is probably that it is reducing the oligosaccharides, so then by natural progression, the gas-producing bacteria are then produced less. I doubt that it's actually reducing the bacteria, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's interesting. How did Brittany learn about this? Did she tell you that or not?
Probably culturally is my guess, because when you're along the Mexican border, you can find a lot more traditional Mexican food.
Interesting.
And so you would see it pop up more, but she grows it. And there are other carminative herbs.
Yeah. I remember
There's
reading,
a lot,
because I think chamomile's one. I seem to remember that chamomile's a carminative herb because I've had that quite a lot.
It is on the list indeed. So I'll throw the list down for you. Lemon balm, dill, aniseed, fennel, licorice root, rosemary, slippery elm, marshmallow root, peppermint, ginger, chamomile, turmeric, cardamom, pineapple sage, cumin, coriander, and cinnamon. There's another Mexican herb, or an herb Mexicans use, called yerba santa, which is from a different region, and it is sometimes used to flavor beans. And it is, quote, also used as a bitter tonic to stimulate digestion. Chewing on tender young yerba santa leaves is good for digestion. So we're always coming back to the bitterness. And if you've ever butchered an animal, then you've seen the bile sac. And everybody's like, don't cut the bile sac. If you if you nick the bile sac, you ruined everything within spitting distance. Because that is a bitter, bitter green liquid that comes out of the bile sac. It is extremely bitter. And, like cures like, as we hear in ancestral food all the time. So I think, well, bitter herbs for your bile cleansing. That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
So it seems to me logical, all things being equal, to cook your beans with some of these herbs. Why not? I mean, who doesn't want some cumin and coriander in their beans? That sounds amazing. Yeah. And maybe not peppermint. I don't know about that one. But You could also chew on some of the digestive bitter herbs. So nobody's feelings are hurt by chewing on some peppermint or drinking a little,
No.
aniseed and lemon balm tea. That sounds just wonderful. There's also a product that is sold here in the United States, I think was invented in Canada, which apparently, Allison, the name has a different meaning where you live, but it isn't
does,
offensive at all. So the product is called Beano, and this is the enzyme alpha galactosidase.
Oh, so you can actually take the enzyme.
Mm-hmm.
I see.
What you would do is you would take it right before you started eating it, so that the minute the beans hit your stomach, alpha galactosidase is already in there.
Yeah.
And it would also move into your small intestine. I do not know enough about the process here to understand how you then don't just have the bacteria build up or the gas build up in your stomach. So somebody who is more familiar with it may need to inform us on that. I didn't go super far down this trail simply because I was looking for more ancestral means of dealing with the problem. But this is something people swear by. Yeah. So, and I'm not to say you should or should not do that. I just was looking for specifically ancestral methods. But it apparently also doesn't entirely eliminate the problem. It just reduces it.
Okay.
You can take digestive bitters as a supplement as well, like in capsules.
Mm-hmm.
And then Young Living sells a blend that we've used for years and years called Digise, which is a kind of nickname for digestive energizer. And that is a blend of tarragon, ginger, peppermint, juniper, fennel, lemongrass, anise, and patchouli. And you can put it on your stomach or under your tongue or drink it in tea or in honey. Clearly, it's all of the bitters that, carminatives and whatnot. So some people do that. And then as a side note, Brittany said there's a restaurant called Fonda San Miguel. And if you're ever in Texas, which Allison is 3 times bigger than the UK. So kind of if you're ever in Texas in this area, then she said they serve really great interior Mexican food.
Mm-hmm.
So the last addition to your cooking in terms of herbs that can help you digest, I got from Catherine Chapp and the Weston A. Price article. Again, that is linked in the show notes, as is all the articles and the websites of the restaurant I just mentioned, all in the show notes. So Catherine says, another trick to cooking beans and minimizing those troublesome oligosaccharides is to add a 4 to 6 inch strip of the sea vegetable kombu in your bean pot during the warmed soak period, which I will explain farther down. Kombu helps alkalinize water and also contains alpha galactosidase, the enzyme needed for digesting these complex sugars, therefore enhances the process. So I would be interested
to know if other people do that, whether it's made a difference, because when we were in Italy, maybe when Gabriel was quite young, I did that religiously and did not notice any difference at all. So I'd like to know whether anyone else notices it makes a difference. So
I'm curious
on Discord if you're a supporter, and let me know if you try that, how it goes.
Now, I want to make a quick note on something that I am not informed enough on to really discuss, but I want to make sure it's noted. If somebody is listening and they're thinking, wait a minute, alpha galactosidase, I have alpha-gal syndrome. Keep in mind, alpha-gal this is a syndrome that you can get it after a tick bite. And it is, I'm trying to get the name right. It's like alpha. It's a protein, if I'm remembering rightly, not an enzyme. So alpha galactosidase, the ending is quite important. Ase is the endings you see on enzymes. Yeah. And so this is not the same thing as the animal or the mammalian sensitivity that you would see in alpha-gal syndrome. So this may be something you want to discuss with an actual somebody who does something with your stomach.
We know what you mean.
Yes, you get the point. But just keep in mind, those are two different things. So next I want to address, Allison, the benefits of soaking. I want to explain how that can help. So now that we feel a little more confident about the process that beans use to produce gas, let's take a quick ad break and then talk about sources for beans and cooking methods to deal with that process.
Are you already making Boza, the probiotic millet drink, in your home kitchen? Yeah, Boza what? If you've listened to some of our earliest episodes, you have probably heard me ask Allison about 15 times how to pronounce this word. Boza is an ancient Turkish beverage made of fermented millet. It is gluten-free, lectin-free, and dairy-free. It is rich in probiotics and minerals and is one of the richest food sources of magnesium. And best of all, extremely economical to make. The process is easy, repeatable, and simple. Allison's course, Boza, the probiotic millet drink, filmed in her sunny Italian kitchen, was an incredible way for me to learn as she walked me through step by step the process for making this drink and how to keep it on nonstop repeat in my own kitchen. Go to ancestralkitchen.com/BOZA to purchase the class and start making your Boza today.
All right, I'm actually going to lead with sources just real quick, because that is going to be important for you as we go through the explanation process of dealing with beans. So first off, I'm going to say that, like everything else we've discussed ever, the ingredients and how they are raised is going to play a very key part in your experience of them.
Yeah.
For better or for worse. I would always say start by checking your local farms. And I will say, before you run to the grocery store and start writing down the price of dried beans there, let me just tell you that your local beans will be more expensive.
Mm-hmm.
They will also be 1,000 times better, as I will prove to you in the next section. Yeah, at least 1,000 times, possibly more. So if you're in the Western Washington / Arlington area, I will shout out Garden Treasures, who was our CSA source when we lived down south. They are an excellent farm. Allison, you've had their beans. We sent you their Jacob's cattle beans.
I remember.
So delicious. And when you have fresh, which means raised within the past 12 months, raised within the past year beans, you will realize you've been sold a lie your entire life. It's quite a shock to encounter fresh beans. I will also say, for everybody who doesn't live there, Rancho Gordo, this was a source shared by Brittany, and we'll share a little bit more about them later. And then, Allison, for you in the UK, you have Hodmedod's, which I go to their website every once in a while, just like I go to Piper's Farm, just to stare at the pretty pictures and cry.
Look at the wonderful things that they're going.
I put links for all those places in the show notes, but I also just want to say, check around you. Ask around you. Ask at your farmer's market. Do you know anybody who grows and sells dried beans? You don't grow dried beans, but you grow them and you dry them. And I will also say many beans and many bean varieties are not in stock all the time. They're grown and sold in the same year. So inevitably they're going to run out. Hopefully they'll run out within that year. And you get them while you can and you eat them while they're fresh, or, they're dried, but they're still fresh.
Yeah.
So let's talk about ancestral preparation.
Okay.
First, Allison, I want to ask you, if or when you ever cook legumes, which you've alluded to that you don't tons and tons because of aforementioned issues, how do you do?
So we always soak them at least overnight in water that is warm. Usually how I do that is I put cold water in, 85% cold water, and then I boil the kettle and I put a little bit in of hot, water that's just boiled, stir it around, because I can never get water to the right temperature, in its entirety. So stir that around and then put the beans in, and then usually I put apple cider vinegar in, stir them, put a plate on the top, leave them at least overnight. And sometimes I will leave them 2-3 days. Sometimes I am not ready to eat them then, and I will put them in the fridge. If I do that, I usually drain off that liquid and redo the liquid and put them in the fridge, or drain them completely and leave them in the fridge drained and then rinse them before I cook them. I will watch the water and see the state it's in, because sometimes some beans, you leave them for a day and the water is really quite, horrible. It's got all the scum on the top. It's got lots of kind of soapy kind of stuff in the water. So I will drain the water and do it again sometimes, depending on how much time I've got, when I'm looking at it, how long I've left it for. And then I will cook them. And the moment if we do beans, we cook them in an Instant Pot, because Stephen Gundry's book about lectins had a big influence on the problems that we have with Gabriel. And he had some studies which shows that the only way to get rid of lectins in beans is to cook them in the pressure cooker. So we use the Instant Pot for our beans.
All right.
So that's it. Did I pass?
Good. Sounds very similar to what I've always done.
Okay.
I do the same. I rinse them well usually. Ours are sometimes kind of dirty. And I sort them if I need to. And then I cover them with warm water. Okay. And I soak them overnight. I usually throw in either a splash of whey or some lemon juice. Apple cider vinegar would work too. I just usually don't have that on my counter. And then in the morning, I rinse them very thoroughly and I bring them to a boil in fresh water.
Oh, yeah. I missed that bit. Always fresh water. Yeah.
Yeah. And then sometimes they come to a boil and then I pour them through a metal strainer and I drain all that water out and I rinse them. And then I put in clean water again and cook them again. Well, they're not even cooked yet. They just came to a boil. Sometimes I've done that multiple times. Like if I'm just in the kitchen, I keep starting them over basically.
That's really interesting because, that the Chinese do that for pork stock. I remember reading it in Nourishing Asian Kitchen, the book that Chelsea Green published last year. And to get that clear broth, because the protein clouds come up. In China, they put the pork stuff in, and then literally when it comes to the boil and all that scum's there, instead of skimming the scum off like we might do, or stirring it back in if we don't want to, they tip it all through a sieve, like you're explaining to do with the beans, put it all back in, and then put fresh water in. So that's a similar kind of process.
That's interesting. I actually ran across some things bean-wise that I didn't even cram into this episode that referred to the cloudiness of the water. Okay. Well, I'm feeling very ancestral now. So my process feels a little bit laborious, but I don't like soaking beans in warm water. I don't know why I started doing that. I just felt like that's what the beans wanted. And then rinsing them and putting them back in and rinsing them. Again, I just felt like that's what the beans wanted. Doesn't make any sense, but sometimes I just feel like the food wants me to do something, and so I do it. And then when I read the article that I'm going to refer to later, I was like, this is why the beans wanted me to do that.
Okay.
So why soak beans? Why not just put them straight dried with water into the Instant Pot, as every Instant Pot recipe will tell you to do? Well, for one, beans that are soaking will absorb the water. They'll usually not lentils and not peas so much, but they'll double their size before you even cook them. So the starches expand slowly and uniformly when they're soaking, which avoids the problem of split skins. And, split skins, if you're making refried beans, not such a problem, but, split skins can then get you that cloudy water that you've referred to with the pork broth, which you don't always want. And for two, soaking begins the process of breaking down the oligosaccharides that are so tough to digest. Soaking does not entirely remove them, or at least generally speaking, it doesn't. Stay tuned. But it does reduce them somewhat. Hence, there's less carbon dioxide and hydrogen from that large intestine fermentation process. And the third reason is soaking neutralizes phytic acid in beans. So, as we know, phytates can block the absorption of minerals. And do you remember when we said earlier, there's so many minerals in beans? Well, if you get those minerals with the phytates, well, then you won't be getting quite as much of a benefit from those minerals. And if you listen to the oat episode, it isn't really a problem to encounter phytates every once in a while, but if you have them at every single meal, and especially today when all of us are mineral deficient to start with, it is a real problem. So we'll come back to this later.
That's where the warm water comes in, certainly for grains, and I'm sure it's the same for and the acid actually. It's the same for legumes, because in order to most effectively get rid of the phytic acid, make sure the phytase, the enzyme, does its job to get rid of it, you need to keep those beans at a warm temperature and you need to have an acidic environment. So when we talk about soaking, we're not just talking about putting them in the cold water. The hot water and the acidic addition is for that
Correct.
reason.
Now, also, Allison, you referred to the foamy, soapy look.
Yeah.
This is the dissolved oligosaccharides. They give that soapy look to the top of water. So rinsing the beans thoroughly before cooking them is how you reduce the oligosaccharides that are in your pot. Interestingly, the beans can resorb those oligosaccharides if you don't strain them out. And skimming the foam when it's boiling, and then I realized that's why sometimes I just was instinctively taking the pot off and pouring the entire thing through a metal strainer and starting over, because it seemed like skimming wasn't just sufficient enough. So
what's
some beans
interesting,
are more
though,
foamy as well.
What's interesting with that is the aqua faba, the bean soaking liquid, is used in cooking. It can be, I know people have used it as an egg substitute, and people use it for several other cooking things. And so actually, potentially that water has, the soaking water.
Well, not necessarily, because as we'll see I actually have a jar of aquafaba in my fridge right now, but as we'll see, you could have skimmed, rinsed, and then started over, all of that before the beans cooked.
Yeah.
All of this is like in a preparation to cooking the beans.
Yeah. Okay.
So then the beans cook, and the thick liquor that they kind of produce could then be your aquafaba. So that's a possibility.
Okay, I get it. Okay.
All right. So now we're getting to the crux of the argument, or the point of the show, which is the specific process detailed also in the Weston A. Price article. And then the steps and the portions in there I was finding in other literature before I even got to the Weston A. Price article. And I kind of put everything together and realized, oh, this is what's happening. So the researchers who came up with the method I'm about to describe were granted a patent by the U.S. Patent Office, described as they devised a way to remove flatulence-causing oligosaccharides in legumes for the commercial bean canning industry. The bean technicians describe bean technician. I mean, what a job. Describe a process gleaned from careful observation and precise measurement, and without special effects or secret ingredients, which makes use of just water, heat, and time. Okay. So these are things we come up with. Now, I will argue that there's a few measuring tools that you would need to have to really do this accurately. And I don't think it's unreasonable to have these in the kitchen, especially because I already have them. So I feel like, oh, that's probably not that far off the mark to have them in someone's kitchen. So I'm going to give the steps and sort of flesh out the reasons for them. And then I will give a brief summary or an overall narration of the steps, since I'm going to be talking a bit about each step. And I also typed out my summary narration and put it in the show notes on our website. So if you want to save the details to a note in your phone or something, you've got them there. All right. Step one is choosing your beans with great care. Less than 13 months old. Older than 13 months, they have a declining nutrient level. They're harder to rehydrate. They have a wrinkly skin, and they have a tough skin. And I thought, oh no, I have so many beans that are really old. Somebody gave me, I've referred to before, many, like 10 5-gallon buckets full of beans. And they're pretty old. And so I keep thinking, well, we'll finish using them. And then, but at this point, I'm like, I don't know. Maybe we shouldn't. We'll come back to that later. The best age for beans And remember, these people are talking to the bean canning industry, so you do have more leverage there. You can do this in a specific season. But if you're a home canner, I will say you could can your beans for the year at a specific time of year if you bought them all fresh and dried from a farm. The best age for beans is from harvest to 4 months old. That is quite a short window.
Yeah, definitely.
But now we know. All right, number 3. Best age was number 2. Number 3, I discovered in multiple places that hard tap water, we've heard this before. Brittany said she's heard it too. It reinforces the pectin in the skins. Everybody says don't use hard tap water. They don't say why. This is why. It reinforces the pectin in the skins, which increases the likelihood that they will split. And so a tougher skin, you just imagine, now you have something inside that's trying to expand and it can't because the skin is extremely tough.
Yeah.
Some people said, I thought with a tougher skin, it won't split, but it's actually going to split more. Like having a brittle building material instead of one that can flex and breathe like wood. The materials bind with the bean's natural compounds and make them tougher. Minerals in water.
Okay.
So you don't want hard water. Again, I found that if they are soaked for too short of a time and then cooked, they will still split because they did not hydrate evenly. The example given, linked in the show notes, was kidney beans soaked for 6 hours. Kidney beans are pretty big. They're like about the biggest bean, one of the biggest beans you're going to encounter. So 6 hours is not enough. You said you soaked yours overnight. I think a lot of us do because we just put it, to soak and then we go to bed. So the size and type of legume affects soaking time. I don't have an exact table for you of the size, but this is where I would say you need a kitchen notebook and you need to be making notes to successes and failures as you go. Back to the Weston A. Price article, they say the key to the flatulence-free method of bean preparation that we're describing here is utilizing maximally 2 actions, which you guys understand so well because of all the things we just talked about. 1, leaching out those pesky oligosaccharides into a warm, slightly basic soap water. The other, to initiate the activity of, guess what? Endogenous oligosaccharide reducing enzymes to digest the sugars inside the bean. You can start that process. That's what these researchers found was you can start the starch digestion in the bean before you even start cooking it. All right, step 5. The beans are covered with 4 times their weight in water, and the water is warmed to about 120 degrees Fahrenheit. So, Allison, this affirms you and I using warm water. I just felt like it was better, but I didn't know why. And you clearly knew because you've read everything Weston Price anyways, but you also knew. And the researchers stated different bean varieties rehydrate best at slightly different temperatures, but the range is from 90 Fahrenheit to 130 Fahrenheit. And represents the optimal temperature for rehydrating beans to between 50 and 95% of their fresh weight. So if you peg it right in the middle at like 100, 120, I feel like you'll be on the money. Number 6. Yes, the soft water. And as this is also confirmed by what I had found. The water used in this stage should be soft, quote, specifically with a calcium carbonate content less than 90 parts per million. How many of us are picturing that? But you can hit it with a pH meter, and they say with a pH between 6.5 and 9. So pretty base. In other words, just slightly acid to alkaline. And Allison, this is confirmed by Catherine found 19th century cookbooks that noted the types of water to use. And they said well water, rich in minerals, was the least favored.
Okay.
Well water coming down from, it's run through all the stones. It's down by it's nice and rich in minerals, not so great for, those minerals are going to be binding to the bean's natural compounds, and it's going to make the beans tough and they're going to split and all these problems. So you can measure the pH in your own kitchen fairly easily. What were you going to say, Alison?
I was going to say, I just remembered Patient Gray's Honey from a Weed. There's a section in there on cooking beans. And I seem to remember that she said that when the beans were older, that the skin was tougher, just like what you just said, but that they put bicarbonate of soda in the water, which breaks down the pectin. So I think maybe if people have beans that are old, that stash you've got that's very, very, very old, maybe you could just add a bit of bicarb of soda in and it would help those skins not be as tough and split. I just remember that suddenly because
Brittany said she had heard that as well. Also reducing the acidity in the water if you put the baking soda in. And the method I use for making hummus, I actually take cooked chickpeas and then I boil them for 30 minutes with baking soda to really make them mushy because they blend into just magic after you do that. I learned that from Cookies and Kate website. Their hummus recipe is the bomb. Okay, I'll put that in the show notes too. Fine, twist my arm. So all right, so that was, let's see, were we on step 6? We were on step 6.
Yeah, you were talking about the well water.
Yep. Okay, so the beans were rehydrated in this experiment. Now, rehydration, I'm going to now say rehydration is step 1 of the soaking. There's 2 steps to the soaking process. Rehydration is step 1, and then you're going to do a second step of soaking, all as a preamble to the cooking. So don't be alarmed at this short time. They rehydrated the beans for 1 to 4 hours. So rehydration, step 1, warming is step 2 before the canning process, or in our case, the cooking, or you could be canning. So we'll get all of our hours of soaking in by the time we get to the end of step 1 and step 2. So the time it takes to rehydrate beans will vary widely, but it seems to range from 1 to 4 hours. And a well-hydrated bean has tissues, I quote Catherine here, that will allow migration of the endogenous enzymes throughout the entire bean to digest the sugars in step 2. So you're rehydrating the bean, you're getting it kind of close to size, 50 to 95% of its fresh size, and you're making space inside for there to be pathways where endogenous enzymes can move to the sugars. And then they're going to do their work. Their labors will commence in step 2.
Okay.
All right. So the beans have been warm at 120. And I was thinking, Allison, 1 to 4 hours at 120, that's exactly like making yogurt. So we could, perhaps I'm going to start soaking my beans in a cooler the same way I soak or ferment yogurt in a cooler.
You know, when I did my research into phytic acid and grains, I could see that the science papers were maintaining that warm temperature.
Yes.
And I just thought, us home cooks aren't. We might be starting with 120F.
Exactly.
But if you leave that on the counter all day, it's not going to be that temperature by the end of the day.
20 minutes, it'll be down from that temperature.
Yeah, not quite the same as what they're doing in the labs. But I don't have the facility to test what's happening with my temperature dropping. And I don't have the headspace or the facility to maintain that 120F for 24 hours. But if you do, then you're more likely to get scientifically better results, I think.
Right. And what I figured as I read this was I just have to treat it like any other ferment or bread dough or something where you want to keep it warm. And I have devised methods to do that without power. Many's the time. And the means I use the most, you have your proofing box. And then I use just a standard lunch cooler and I put it on the kitchen floor and I put in my container of warm milk with inoculation in it. And then I put in a jar on either side of basically boiling water. And the entire situation, as I close it up, warms up to 120 and stays right at the perfect temperature for yogurt. It's still warm when I open it the next day. And certainly for 1 to 4 hours, it will be fine. So my thought was, I guess I could just be more serious about this and just approach it like any other fermentation project.
Yeah, it's interesting because my proofing box doesn't go up as high. 120F is about 50C. which is quite
You're
temperature.
probably
A dehydrator could, if I still have my dehydrator, which I don't.
Yeah.
If I had the space in it. So a dehydrator can go to 50. Some of the ovens can go to 50 and go down as low as 50C. So you could keep it in a very, very low oven.
Yeah.
Because that's a higher temperature than, I would leave a bread dough at, or I would leave my milk kefir at this end for sure.
Yeah. Or you could put it, I also have done this before, but it does take power. I put the boot warmer next to whatever it is I'm fermenting, and then I put a cardboard box over the top. It's pretty well.
Yeah.
And if you're thinking that's too many steps, well, we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay. So now that the beans are warmed at a temperature low enough to not kill the native enzymes, this is important. Remember, heat kills enzymes. We want those enzymes alive and just warmed up enough to start working and digest the sugars. The temperature cannot reach 150 Fahrenheit or everybody's dead in there. So the beans are then drained, and then the soft, neutral to slightly 6.5 to 9 pH alkaline water is added to the beans at a ratio, again, 4 parts water to 1 part beans by weight. So this time, the water is heated slightly more to a temperature that the authors of the study determined was optimal for maximum activity of the endogenous enzymes. That temperature is 147. But remember that the enzymes are destroyed at 150. So I feel like 147 is like, wow.
It's a fine line. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Allison, I think the world has space for you to invent a pot that the beans go in. Like a washing machine. It dumps the water, it drains, it runs it again, it heats up to temperature. Okay. Maybe not. Maybe the world's not meant for that much magnificence yet, but it could be. So I think that might be the toughest step, because I would say maybe I'd be targeting like 140. You need a thermometer if you're doing this accurately. And then step 9. So this is what I found interesting, Allison. We alluded to it before. So I had the habit of changing and rinsing the water while the beans are soaking, sometimes multiple times, and then also sometimes during the boil. Clearly, I'm exceeding 150 Fahrenheit if I'm boiling the beans. So the enzymes, they're dead. But some instinct was telling me that I didn't want the beans soaking in the water perpetually that their oligosaccharides had gone out into, even though I did not know that that's what was happening. So in step 2, when the beans are at this amazingly precise 147 Fahrenheit, or I don't know, 62 Celsius or something, then the while they're in this heated but not hot step, the water was changed 2 or 3 times to allow for continuous diffusing of the sugars into the water. So if you think about it, the enzymes are hard at work. They're shoving all those sugars out the door, and then the sugars are floating around in the water trying to find a home. And if the water is not changed, the equilibrium between the beans and the soak water is reached. That is to say, the beans absorb all the water back in. The sugar can diffuse back into the beans. Are we still?
Yeah,
are we all here?
I'm still with you. I'm just wondering.
Oh
yeah, I'm waiting to the end so I can say, okay, just tell me in 3 sentences what I need to do. But I know from reading these reports, and this is a scientific lab situation, and it's not a situation that we can ever. Perhaps someone could, perhaps with a test kitchen at home you could, but really, realistically, in a life where there's work and kids and family and friends and things to do, this is extreme. Someone's been there though. Someone's been there.
I want to give the complete description and the reasons why for everything, because then you can decide which pieces you're willing to compromise on, because you know exactly what you're doing. All right, step 10. We haven't even cooked the beans yet. All right, soaking times ranged from 2 to 6 hours, depending on the size of the bean. Smaller bean, shorter step. The conclusion was that at the end of step 2, so that 147 F temperature for 2 to 6 hours, with changing the water 1 to 3 times, presumably, I guess they did it, every third of the time, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Then the beans were tested and had no oligosaccharides.
Oh my gosh.
None.
Wow.
At which point they were then briefly blanched to firm the protein. So they would have been plunged into boiling water and then taken off to be canned. So now your beans ready to cook. So step 11, in the canning process, obviously the beans are cooked the rest of the way. You could move your beans at this point to the Instant Pot, Allison, to do your kill off the lectins situation.
Mm-hmm.
You could cook them on the stovetop. Brittany says once you put beans into a Dutch oven, her method, her comments, and her notes are in the show notes on the website because it's a little bit long, so it's not in the podcast app. But she says once you put them in the oven and cover them and bake them, Rancho Gordo method, you'll never go back to boiling beans. Or you can blanch your beans, and for canning safety purposes, they must be in the boiling liquid for 30 minutes. Then you could pressure can in jars. And Angie, who is a podcast listener and supporter, her pressure canning book is listed in the show notes because I use that book for canning. Does not have the steps I just described for eliminating the oligosaccharides, but it has the canning process, which you could then utilize.
And I think if you get to the end of this step 11 we're on, you should probably go and have a lie down and pat yourself on the back immensely because
take off your white jacket, your goggles, your safety goggles, your hair cap, gloves. And now I'll give you 12, which is just my summary. Here we go.
Okay, this is good. Okay, I'm ready.
Fresh beans are ideal. Under 4 months old if you can, but certainly under 13 months. Step 1, you're going to cover them in soft water. Water, which is 4 times the bean's weight at about 120 Fahrenheit or 49 Celsius.
Mm-hmm.
Rehydrate the beans 1 to 6 hours depending on the bean's size and make notes on the beans that split to help you know. Also, please send us your notes. Drain the beans of their soaking water. Step 2, put the beans in fresh, soft water, preferably warmer at about 147.
Okay.
Let them soak at this temperature. Use a cooler like we do with yogurt. I imagine we're not going to keep it at 147 perfect, but if you're keeping it fairly warm, remember 147 is just the optimal maximum oligosaccharide activity. Still, some activity is a good thing. Enzymes need warmth, but not blasting heat. Let them soak at 147 or 64C for 2 to 6 hours, depending on the bean size, and change the water 2 to 3 times.
Yeah.
At the end of this period, move on to canning or cooking. That's not so bad, is it?
Yeah. No, it's not. And enjoy them and cook them in bulk because if you do it in a big batch, then you won't have to do that so often. And then when you actually sit down to eat them, tell your husband what you did to prepare all these beans and see what he says.
He's like, what? Is our Bunsen burner on the counter? Why do you have why is there a pH meter laying on the counter? Why is there a water gravity scale? I don't know. I'm making up words now. I'm not a scientist. Make sure everybody knows that you're a martyr and how much it works to get there.
Exactly.
But yes, I was going to affirm that, Allison. I would say this is also why we do the beans in bulk because you're thinking, what? Yeah. Well, you did all that. You might as well have done more than that day's dinner.
Definitely.
And you can use the super cubes to freeze, 1 cups of just, once you cook the beans, say you could freeze 1 cup batches of beans in cooking liqueur. Yeah. Or you could just freeze wide mouth pint jars of it. You could even freeze cooled gallon bags of the beans. You could pressure can the beans. So I usually do 5 pounds at a time of beans because then I can pressure can 2 batches and get a bunch of pint jars of beans on the shelf. Either way, I do say, at the very least, cook the week's worth of beans. Cook enough black beans that you can serve some at lunch or on a salad or put them into your bean brownies throughout the week. At the very least, would be my suggestion.
Yeah.
I want to hit real quick, Allison, back on neutralizing phytic acid because so much attention was given to the oligosaccharides. I want to make sure that I kind of emphasize this just a little bit because it is going to slightly adjust some information that we utilize. So phytates, as we mentioned, phytate prevents mineral absorption, most especially zinc and iron. And everybody who's listened to more than 3 episodes of our podcast knows this, but I'll say it anyways. You know that flour and grains contain phytate, which is why ancestral preparations want you to prepare them by soaking or leavening the grains, which neutralizes the phytates. So we are chronically low on minerals these days. And a big part of that could be that even if you're taking your electrolytes and you're taking mineral drops, you might be pairing you're pairing your minerals like the potassium with it. And I'm not putting calcium in it and all these things. You may be getting very technical about getting your minerals in, but you may be then immediately binding them up with non-ancestrally prepared grains and losing the benefits of your sometimes very expensive electrolyte supplementation. So I just want to make that statement so that everybody understands, when we harp on and on about soaking grains, this is primarily one of the reasons why. So soaking the beans releases phytase. Remember we talked about enzymes and endogenous enzymes? Well, phytase is one of those enzymes, and this degrades phytates. The bean is dried in order to halt the enzyme activity, generally speaking, and keep the bean from sprouting and growing. So when you are hydrating the bean, you're trying to turn all those systems back on, which begins the degrading of the phytates and technically the degrading of the food in general. That's why it's dried to store on your shelf, and then you soak it or cook it to eat it. But how acidic does a soaking water need to be to activate these phytase enzymes? The literature says that soaking the water to activate phytase needs to be from 4.0 to 7.5 pH. So slightly more acidic than our oligosaccharide consuming enzymes to slightly less alkaline than they called for. And if I was to layer the research of both and we wanted to get very precise, then we would say perhaps our optimal window for soaking beans, if phytase activates best at 4.0 to 7.5, and then the other enzymes are activating best at 6.5 to 9, we could even close that window down to the very small window of 6.5 to 7.5. And the Weston A. Price article linked in the show notes below does provide a table showing the optimal pH for phytate breakdown in 5 different legumes, which kind of spans that range. I would say it's possibly more important than we've thought to ensure that the water is fairly alkaline. And I don't know if you can use like a garden pH meter to check that. I have a small bench pH meter. You can get them online where you put a little liquid in a container and then pop your pH meter sensor into it, and it tells you. It's far more accurate than the strips. But if you just wanted to get if you wanted to be in the range of 6.5 to 9, you can definitely get that off with just a strip. So the question is just how much of a concern is this to you, and how seriously do you want those enzymes doing their work? That would probably determine how much money and time you were willing to spend on your pH. And I personally, the strips make me crazy. They're so subjective and I don't love them. That's why I got the actual meter.
Yeah, get that.
Okay. So, and then drawing a question that I pinned farther up or mentioned farther up, can you use the old beans? I really wanted to find out how old the average bean in a grocery store was, and I couldn't find that anywhere. All I could find was beans can last a really long time if you store them right. I'm like, I get that. But like, how old are they? I don't know. We know that the average apple in a grocery store is 13 months old. So I think we can infer that dried beans coming in plastic bags are probably at least that old, if not older. But I don't know how their supply rotates. So beans get harder to cook. They have tougher skins. They aren't as nutritious. I have some old beans, over 10 years old beans, and I have found you can soak them and then bring them to a boil for 30 minutes per Angie Schneider's pressure canning book, linked in the show notes below. And then you can pressure can them. And the pressure canning process produces a remarkably tender and creamy bean. I tried this with some navy beans that I thought there's no salvaging this bucket of beans. They're not cooking soft. They're always crunchy. They're always hard. I thought, let me just try canning them. I was stunned at how good they came out. I did not have the same success trying soaking and then cooking in the Instant Pot. You would think. I do not think the Instant Pot gets up to the kind of pressures that a big pressure canner can. And they were still annoyingly crunchy or hard even after obnoxiously long cooking times in the Instant Pot.
Okay.
And cooking in the Instant Pot just takes a ton of power, which I don't usually want to use. So, if you think you cannot cook beans very well, I'm guessing the beans you have are not very good.
Yeah.
And
I can always get mine soft in the Instant Pot. I've never had a hard bean.
Yeah. So I think the problem is not you, the cook in the kitchen. I think it's the product that you're holding in your hands. Rancho Gordo, Rancho Gordo hasn't popped up that much in this episode, but let me tell you how many articles I read about them. A lot. I read a lot of articles about them because I thought, where did this company come from? How did they start? Why are they here? I linked some of those fascinating articles in the show notes, but one thing I read about was when the gentleman who started Rancho Gordo he was growing small heirloom varieties of beans in his backyard, basically. And he was selling them at a farmer's market. And he was a tiny little table. And he said hippies would come up and yell at him for how expensive his beans were. And he was overpriced. And then he said this chef from, some French restaurant that I don't remember the name of in California, came to his table and then basically started going on and on about how he changed his life and how having fresh within the year beans was the pinnacle of, the culinary experience of beans on the table and all these things. And I thought, wow.
Nice. Yeah.
French Laundry. Is that the name of a restaurant? That's what my head is saying. That might not be right. That doesn't sound right, but whatever. So I would say that getting fresh within the year beans can be a life-changing experience, and it may completely change your perspective on beans and the way we value beans as well. And note that the old beans are not bad in the sense of being rotten or dangerous or toxic to you somehow. They are less tasty, they are less palatable, they are less nutritious. And so many times people tell us that they feel like they cannot cook something well or they don't like it, and it's really just the ingredients that aren't very good. So I would say check out Rancho Gordo for their recipes. They have great recipes on their website. They sell beans, 90% of which are out of stock because they sell them within a month or two. It's very quick. It's a very rapid turnaround. It might be within 4 months. I might not have quite the right number, but I did find how short their turnaround is. It is extremely short. And they have a bunch of small growers in Mexico that grow beans in that area, specific bizarre types I've never heard of. If you've heard of the navy bean, the kidney bean, the pinto bean, the black bean, there's hundreds of beans out there to look at. I put Brittany's instructions for cooking beans on the show notes on the website, and do check out the show notes, you guys. There's a lot of stuff down there, and if you have information on beans you want to send me, please. I'm very interested in hearing it. So, Allison.
Yeah.
Do you feel encouraged to give beans a try? Or maybe adjust the method a little bit and try
adjust the method. I think adjusting the method from that 12-step thing, the temperature.
12-step program for beans.
Yeah, exactly. There are two more things that I'd like to add that came up while we were talking that I scribbled down. So the first one is, often when I've been soaking my beans, they have sprouted and that's fine, particularly lentils. I remember soaking lentils and leaving them for a couple of days, and they've sprouted. And I've cooked sprouted lentils, and they've been delicious. I don't know what it does to the oligosaccharides, but I think that it would neutralize the phytic acid because sprouting definitely activates phytase, and therefore we get rid of phytic acid. The other thing I wanted to say was, if you ever want a meditative sort of process that will make you sit down and force you to be still for a few hours, you can take the skins off your beans manually. And I have done that. And because the troublesome sugars that are in there are mostly in the skin. I seem to remember. And so if you take the skin off, then you are less likely to have problems. And I remember making some kind of butter beans a long time ago when Gabriel was a little boy, and I sat on the back step. I cooked them in the slow cooker, and then I sat on the back step while he was out in the little yard we had, and literally shelled every single bean. There must have been, 500 or something of them in there, and it took a long time, but it was actually really relaxing. And then I made like a tomato sauce, and we ate them without the skins on. So that, if you want something that'll make you sit and stop, you can buy some beans without the skins on. I know that chickpeas, but only in Italy. I haven't found them in this. I have found them in this country. I remember because Nicole came when we found them in the health food store. You can buy chickpeas without the skins on. I think you can probably buy other beans without the skins on. So again, that's another option potentially to try. Or just sit there and pick all the skins off and watch your blood pressure go down as you do it.
Right. If you're the kind of person who likes to peel wallpaper and stuff like that,
exactly.
It's the most satisfying thing ever. So, I have spent many a long moment stirring and like skimming, because if you have a skimming spoon, you kind of stir your beans vigorously, and then you skim off the skins, and you're like, oh, I can do it again, and I'll
get them all.
What am I doing? How long have I been here? What day is it?
Yeah. Exactly. So back to your question. I feel like there are things in what you read and what you've presented to us that we can handpick. Do we want to have a go with this? Will this fit into our routine a bit better? Can we tweak the temperature? Do we have a cooler, that we can keep warm like that? Do we want to change the way we're soaking? Do we want to change the way we're cooking? Like perhaps dumping the water out and putting fresh water back in. There are so many options there to play with without having to do the whole 12 steps.
Yes. First, you have to admit.
Yeah, exactly. There's a problem.
You have to admit to a higher enzyme power. I wanted to close with an encouragement that is kind of based on some of the things we discussed, some of the ideas that came through the pantry episode, which is that one advantage of cooking less variety of things is you really get to focus on perfecting and fine-tuning the few things you are doing. You raise the value of those things in your hand most significantly. And you also notice changes and responses to adaptations in your process much more quickly. If you have beans a few times a week, carefully and precisely prepared, versus once a month or rarely, they become not only part of a routine or a habit, but it's also very noticeable to you when you change the pattern.
Yes.
And Allison, I feel like you and I are both, because of the attention we already give beans, then when we shift anything in this 12-step program, we're going to rapidly notice if it had a difference. And I am most encouraged also personally by understanding why I'm doing a step, like knowing 147 is the optimal maximum activity of the endogenous enzymes. Well, maybe if I can get it pretty close to that and most of the enzyme activity has happened, the majority of the starches are handled,
and that's good enough.
I'm okay with that. They were going for 100% perfection, and maybe I can get pretty close to that. That's still going to be a huge win. Combine that with cooking some bitters or chewing digestive bitters throughout the day, and I feel like we've got a good program going.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, Allison. Well, I'm going to be soaking beans today because I'm so excited about this process. So
wonderful. Well, I should let you go and do that then.
Of course.
Thank you ever so much for all this research and for sifting through it and making it make sense. It's I've learned a lot today, and so I'm sure that everyone listening has too. Thank you.
It was a delight. I'll see you next time, Allison.
Will do. Bye.
If you'd like to support the podcast, you can join as a patron. Choose from various levels starting at $5. You can see what we offer at ancestralkitchenpodcast.com.
While you're there, check out our favourite books, supplements and kitchenware, or give a one-time donation.
Leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts.
And if you know someone who would love our show, tell them about us.
You are helping to bring ancestral food wisdom into modern kitchens, changing the world one plate at a time.